Welcome, everybody, to the Trefz Forum at the Westport Library. My name is Jennifer Bangser, and it's my delight to welcome you to a wonderful discussion this morning on the book Navigating Special Education, The Power of Building Positive Parent-Educator Partnerships, written by Peggy S and Tamara Jacobson, who are on stage with us this evening, joined by Sivan Hong, who will be moderating a discussion. Sivan, a former board member of the Westport Library, comes with a tremendous background in teaching and education herself, as well as a best-selling children's author of books about the experience of neurodiverse children and their troubles and challenges and how they problem solve and learn a little bit more about the world. So we have opportunities for questions. There are cards on the table. If anybody would like to write a question down, I can collect them. Or at the end of the talk, we will have a mic over by the Westport Library step and repeat sign where you can stand up and ask a question. So without any further delay, here is Sivan Hong to introduce the rest of the program for us.
Okay.
Thank you, Jennifer. Just a quick introduction about our incredible authors today. Peggy, if you wave, Peggy, please, is a licensed speech-language pathologist with 30-plus years of experience in public education as an educator and administrator. For the past 12 years, as founder of Speaking Successfully, she's assisted families with special education process and provides communication coaching to business leaders. As an author and a TEDx speaker, and by the way, if you have not watched that TEDx video of her, it's a must-see. She helps parents and educators throughout the IEP process to ensure the child is at the center of the conversation. She's on the board of both the Bridge Academy and Earthplace. Tamara, thank you, author and national speaker, is a licensed principal and superintendent. She's certified in communication arts, ESL, bilingual education, theater arts, early childhood education, and elementary school education. I don't know what you are not certified in, Tamara. She has 30-plus years of experience in public and private education and is currently the director of the East Coast Education Consulting. Tamara assists families and school districts in the education process to ensure the child's needs are at the center of the conversation. She provides training on all the relevant topics pertaining to the landscape of education in the 21st century and helps parents and educators during the IEP process. And as a parent who has gone through the IEP process myself, I can attest that what we are going to talk about tonight is very, very helpful.
Meet Taylor. Taylor used to have a hard time in school and needed more help than other students to keep up with the curriculum. Taylor's parents weren't sure how to navigate the special education process. The school team was making recommendations about placement, programs, and services without considering their suggestions. Ineffective communication and lack of collaboration meant that meetings turned into heated arguments. After Taylor's parents and teachers read Navigating Special Education, they started to listen to each other and were able to communicate more effectively. Parents and educators now understood how to work collaboratively as partners with a shared vision. Everyone felt that their voices were heard during the IEP meetings, and their data-driven perspectives were considered when developing the education plan. As a result, Taylor's academic success improved dramatically. If you want to build a trustworthy parent-educator partnership to ensure student success, visit navigatingspecialeducation.com to order your book today. It's a win-win for everyone.
What was the impetus behind writing this incredible book? What kind of problems were you looking to solve? Either one of you, go ahead.
Yeah.
So this is a very quick but interesting story. About 10 years ago, very far before COVID, when LinkedIn first came out, Peggy and I had not known each other. We live in different states, we're different generation, and we basically, different decade. And we really started writing to one another on LinkedIn. And as educational questions came up, we realized based on some of the responses from other educators, that she and I truly saw a positive approach to some of the problems that existed in education. This was very rare. So Peggy and I decided, even though she lived in Connecticut and I in central New Jersey, we decided that Tarrytown was a great place to meet. And 10 years ago, we started this once a month or so trip where we would meet at a hotel. We would have our computers out, and we started sharing stories, and we started talking about best practices in administration and education. And as these stories would go on, she'd have some, I'd have some, we'd almost fight for the better story. We realized it was very important to put it down in writing. And I said, Peggy, we have to write a book. This is unbelievable, the amount of material we had. And so we started to write the book, but we both were very busy with our careers. Well, fast forward, COVID. And what positive, wonderful thing came out of COVID? We both were able to work from home, and the distance didn't matter as much. And so Peggy and I got back together on a very frequent basis, and we were able to write the book that we're going to share with you today. So the impetus for that book was really our minds, the sharing of our minds, and Peggy's going to say a little bit more about that.
Right, thank you. And actually, when we first started to write the book, our mindset was that we wanted to help parents be able to partner with their school districts. However, when we came back to it, about 6 years later, I guess, on Zoom, we realized that you can't have a partnership if you only have one person in the relationship. So we started working on how to build parent-educator partnerships and help parents and educators work together. And we realized that the problem that we both experienced as we sat at every seat at an IEP table was there was a communication breakdown. And so that's why we created a communication model, which we will talk about. And it's why we decided that if parents and educators had the tools they could to learn to be partners instead of just working on a team. And very importantly, to learn to put the child at the center of the conversation.
Okay, she clearly read ahead in my notes because that was going to be my next question. Both of you talked about the child being at the center in your bios, and you talk about it a lot in the book, and it seems like an obvious concept that, of course, the child is going to be the center of this conversation, but often it's not. So can you tell us a little bit more about what it really means to put the child in the center?
Sure. So when we talk about the child's being in the center, what we both noticed, myself as an administrator, Peggy as an administrator, a speech pathologist, and myself in the role of educator, teacher, we noticed over and over that educators have their own language. They have their own culture. And every school district in the United States has their own culture, language, vernacular, and the parents all have different backgrounds, different languages, different cultures. But when they come together, you hear a lot of opinions, but the opinion that was really left out that Peggy didn't hear and I didn't hear a lot of was really the voice of the student, the voice of the child. And one of the things that kept coming up in our conversations is that it was so important that we really drive this point home that it's not about the wants of the school district or the wants of the parents, but that we're looking to basically have the voice of the student be represented. And if that occurs, everything else falls into place. And through our 5C model, which we're going to discuss, we'll be able to give you a sense of what that shared voice and the voice of the child really means.
Tamara, you really hit it. And I want to add, we realize that culturally, parents and teachers come to that meeting, come to that relationship with a history that has just come down from generation to generation. Teachers are the experts. Parents look at teachers as they know. Parents go to meetings and they're a bit intimidated and oftentimes aren't sure what to say and sometimes even feel like they just have to listen. And so therefore we felt like we needed to empower everyone, to give them the power of how to communicate so that they could put the child and the child's needs. What happened is parents at these IEP meetings discuss what they want, and the district discusses what it has to offer. And yet what we really have to do is how does that come together so that now we're giving the child what they need in order to get a good education.
So you mentioned the 5C model, and as a parent who's walked into the room at a PPT meeting and seen all of the administrators sitting there, and you get this feeling in your stomach like you're gonna throw up, how do you use that 5C model in a real world experience with the parent and with all those people in the room?
Okay, well, let me briefly just explain to you the 5C model because it's our invention, and so nobody else knows what we're talking about until I explain it. So what we looked at is, as I said, communication is what's missing in most IEP meetings. There's breakdowns in communication, or what's happening is lots of monologues, not dialogues. So what we say is the 5 C's is we've got to start with conversations. And then we need to be able to collaborate, cooperate, be available to compromise when necessary in order to reach consensus. And what is great about the model is if you get to that compromise piece and you can't reach a compromise, then you just go back and start having more conversations, so it works well. I'll begin by explaining conversations. Of course, you say, well, we're talking. As I said, those conversations are often monologues. Think about going into a meeting, even a parent-teacher conference, even if it's not for special education. The teacher's sitting there and tells you what your child is doing. You may ask a what question, how, or a how question, how are they doing? What are they learning? And there's no conversation, there's no dialogue going on. And so what we felt was we have to have deep conversations. We need to get to know each other and then start probing and asking the whys and the hows. And from that, we talk about you have to be an active listener, and that's when you're available to really hear what's happening and be able to understand the other person's perspective. And too often, parents don't understand what teachers and their perspective is, and teachers don't understand the parent's perspective, and that will happen through those conversations. Tamara, would you like to talk about collaboration?
Sure. So, excellent job, Peggy. One of the pieces that I want to bring up as we move and you move with us through the 5C model, which is grounded theory for those in academia, we wanted to bring up the point that in order to help parents not have that gut feeling, one of the things that we write about in our book that is another original idea in navigating special education is this idea of the pre-meeting. And a pre-meeting could occur in a classroom, in a library, in a setting where you're just walking outside of the school. And what we talk about in this pre-meeting is that it could be a 30-minute meeting where 15 minutes where the administrator and or teacher meets the parents. You really shouldn't bring up about anything specifically about the child's deficits, how's my child doing. What we want you to talk about in this pre-meeting is, how are things at home? What do you do? What are the dynamics like? What language do you speak? What's your favorite, what is the child's favorite TV show? And just culturally getting responsive information. And then in the second 15 minutes when an administrator or teacher meets with the parents, they can then get into, what are some of your concerns? We've had this great conversation where I let you speak and I've learned a little about you and you've learned a little about me. And it needs to be a give and take and a flow, not just a monologue. So with that, the second 15 minutes can be about the information, a bit about what's going to happen in the IEP meeting. And this brings a reduction of stress and a reduction of the anxiety. And that is one of the answers to helping the parents feel more comfortable, is that pre-meeting piece, which we feel is missing in the menu of what goes on. And then as we move through cooperation, we talk strongly about this idea of everybody coming to cooperate with one another. And I have an idea, Peggy has an idea, Judy has an idea, and everybody has their own experiences, right? Lived experiences, and we all bring that to the conversation. But when we're looking at trying to move to compromise and then a consensus, we truly need everybody to feel comfortable to express their experiences and their vision for their student and or child. So I'll let Peggy explain a little about a shared vision at this time, and then we'll end the 5C model by talking about how do we get to consensus.
Okay, well, as I said, we need to be able to understand the other person's perspective. We need to be able to ask deep conversations, and through that, we can start to collaborate. And as we collaborate, we will start to realize that we have a shared vision. And one of the problems that lots of parents experience is they come to an IEP meeting and or a teacher meeting, and the teacher has the agenda and decides what the child needs, and the parents think they know what the child needs. When you're having conversations and when you're collaborating, you definitely start to find what is the shared vision so that you really are working on the same page to understand and come up with what the child needs. And once you start to collaborate, you are now ready to also cooperate. And we like to differentiate that by saying, collaboration means that we do have a shared vision. We all are working towards this same goal of educating the child. But at the same time, we have to be able to cooperate so that we can work with each other, because as parents and educators, we all have different roles and responsibilities in addressing the child's needs, but we are part of the same partnership that's going to ensure the child's success. And then, of course, we get to that point where we might not agree, and we have to reach a compromise, which is only going to happen if we go back and have conversations so that we can understand, what do you want, and we'll talk more about it, but it's not only what do you want, but why do you want it, and what is the data that drives what and why.
So with that, I hope you understand how it's cyclical. And if you get to the point where compromise has not been met, or you're feeling empty, or that the conversation turned into discourse or a kind of nasty debate, we would encourage, following our model, that you go back to the basic conversations and continue to meet. You can ask for an IEP meeting, or in Connecticut, a PPT meeting, at any time. And that is a right for any family or any administrator to say, we're not done here. We need to continue our conversations. And even though it may take a little more time, it's really a worthwhile investment. In the long run, the more conversations you have, the more you're going going to get to a shared vision. And then the more the voice of the student and the child is going to start to come through. So it's a great investment. So you do that by active listening and empathy. But if you can't get to that point, we encourage that you go back to number one and have conversations, because the process doesn't end until consensus is reached.
We got a question from the audience that has something to do with what you guys have talked about. And again, audience, if there are any questions that you'd like to ask, you can either raise your hand or write them on the index cards over there. So the audience member asks, what do I do when I don't agree with the outcomes listed on the IEP or PPT? Doesn't the parent have the right to object and request further testing and options?
Of course they do, because it is, first of all, we need to go back and think about the IEP process is based on a law that was written 50 years ago. And that law says that parents and educators have equal rights and equal responsibility and equal voices at that meeting. So if a parent doesn't agree, of course they need to, one, tell the district that they don't agree. They need to, from our perspective, have data to show what is.
I'm just going to interrupt for 1 sec. If that occurred and you walk into a PPT meeting and or an IEP meeting and it's already filled out, you have the right to say, I'm not going to leave here until you stamp draft on that IEP. It is a draft because they should not have filled anything out. So when you go to a meeting in your school, that section should really be empty because you haven't had the real conversations yet, and every partner and every team member has not expressed themselves yet. So if that happens to you and it's pre-filled out, it really needs to legally be a draft document, which means you're in the process of negotiating and discussing. If it's filled out, you can also feel comfortable to reiterate, we haven't discussed that yet. And that's what we're gonna do. We're gonna have a conversation.
Right, and I think you're talking about if they've gone through that process. And I would say if at the end of the process, you didn't reach consensus, which is where I think the question was coming from. If you're not reached consensus, then that's why we're at compromise. We haven't gotten there. So if in fact, the administrator, and I've been to meetings, says, well, the meeting's over and this is what we want. The parent has every right to say, no, I'm not in agreement. I would like to come back and meet again and try to have conversations outside of that meeting to let the teachers and the administrator know not only what you disagree with, but why. Because just to say, I want, and that's what a lot of parents say, well, I want this or I want that. Again, it's about what the child needs. And so what we need to do is, why do you think I always turn it around to say, well, why do you think your child needs that? And then I need data. And to the district, why do you believe that this is the most appropriate way to address the child's needs? And again, we need data, and that will drive the conversation. Instead of too often school districts, well, I've got an hour for this meeting, and then we're going to decide and it's over. That's not the way the process should work.
And the other, to piggyback on what Peggy said, there's no time limit to a PPT meeting. Of course, if you're an administrator, which I have been, we have to get substitute teachers, and time is important. But if you think about it from a supervisor's perspective or an administrator, it really will be cost effective if you guys can sit there and have deeper and meaningful conversations to get to some form of compromise, or at least decide to end the meeting where you're going to make a date date to come back and finish the discussions, and don't leave that meeting until you say, I'd like to meet again in 2 weeks, or put a date out there and ask your case manager to help you with that. So in the long run, even though you might have to spend a little money, maybe extending the time of the meeting to give coverage, the truth is it's really worth it.
It will be cost effective if parents and educators up front build this relationship and use this model. I can guarantee that as you move along the child's career, those meetings are going to get shorter and shorter because parents and educators have a shared vision. They have a mutual understanding with each other, and they're open to honesty and transparency and trust each other. And so once that trust is established, if the school district using data explains something that they want, parents are more likely to trust them. And if a parent has a concern and brings data, they're more likely to trust the parent and say, oh, yes, we need to address this. And it's about building that relationship that this is all about. And I don't believe, Tamara and I don't believe that for a long time that these relationships have really been built. Nobody is putting in the time to do it. And it's time that is needed.
So you keep talking about data, and data feels like a big, scary word from the perspective of a parent. How do I get data about my child? And what does it mean for the school to give me data about my child?
So I would say the single most important thing about building a relationship that is already slightly adversarial or slightly defensive from one side or the other is data. And we drive this point home in our book. If somebody comes to you and they have irrefutable evidence that your child is reading at a 4th grade level, then they can show you the results and or a video of them reading, and or you should be able to see it within the homework that they do if you're a parent. So we believe that one of the ways that parents feel empowered and staff feels comfortable is if they collect student portfolio work, and or parents actually learn how to collect their own data. One of the things that Peggy and I are very proud of is that within our book, in the back of Navigating Special Ed, we actually have exemplars listing how and what should be collected, what are effective pieces of data collection, how to do data collection behaviorally, physically, academically, socially. And we're very proud of this list. This is not based on anything except our 60 plus years of experience that we've put together. But we are proud that we are laying out a roadmap for parents and educators. We list both what would be good best practice for educators in terms of their data collection, and then for parents who this is very foreign to them, how to do it. And I'm just gonna take the time. I told Peggy I was going to tell this story just very quickly. If you've read my bio, you know I am a mother of a daughter who is 17. She's a twin, and she lives with cerebral palsy and autism. She has a dual diagnosis. She does wear diapers, and she's nonverbal. She uses some form of total communication. You're impressed with that, Peggy, right? Total communication. She uses a talker, or Dynavox, and somewhat, and she uses a PEC system. She uses some sign. And my daughter had this experience where she was in a resource room in an elementary school, and I do very strongly believe that when children are young, that it is important to be as inclusive as possible and follow the least restrictive environment. How I feel as they get older, we can talk about that. But when my daughter was young, she was in our local school, and she was in the resource room. And the teacher came to myself and my husband and said, I just want to share that we don't think your daughter can really, is really in the appropriate placement. And we feel that she should be it's time, this is first grade, it's time to move her into a specialized school. We can handle everything, but she's not reading. We can handle everything, but she's not reading. So it wasn't taking her to the bathroom. It wasn't giving her her cutout cup and her drinks. It wasn't the fact that she could, limitly raise her hand. But instead, it was, she's not reading, and this is the resource room, and these kids are reading. So I was quiet, and this teacher didn't really know my background. And I let her finish respectfully, and I wasn't thinking of how to answer. I was actively listening. So I went home, and I thought, what am I going to do? I know my daughter can read. And I know this because I have a special ed teacher that comes to my home, and I have a specialized room set up for her. And we do the Sunday reading program. And she has a word wall list, and I have every card laminated, and I have all of these specialized ways that I know that my daughter can put together a sentence on the floor and move it around. Dog went in the doghouse, or dog is Sammy, or whatever it is that I'm asking her to answer. And very, very strongly, she could always answer correctly out of a group of 3. So this was a time that we did not have the telephones, but I was very into CDs. And what I did was I asked all of her community of practice, the OTs, the PTs, the speech pathologists, the ABA therapist, the early interventionist, everybody. I asked them if they would be willing to speak on camera, and I made a CD. And then I actually had my daughter reading and how it was that she read. And I called for an IEP meeting, and I shut the lights, and I showed the video. And then we turned the lights on. And I said, I understand that you didn't know this information. I was not aware you didn't know that she could read. I'd like to move forward, and I'd love to work together in partnership, but my daughter belongs in this classroom. And the teacher agreed, and we had another 2 years of success in the primary school. So I just wanted to share that story because it was a successful story using data. And I feel extremely strongly that if I had not presented that data, my daughter would have been moved immediately.
That was very moving story, Tamara. Don't want you to think that you have to go through all of that experience that Tamara did.
We've moved a lot also in technology.
She did a lot of stuff, and it can be as simple as a parent taking a video, or it can be as simple as a parent having 1 or 2 examples of what they said and what the child said to document that. I also want you to know that in school, when teachers present data, that is powerful too, and it removes the stress. One of the things that's special about our book is that we have lots of stories. We have another story in the book about teachers making a video and really getting parents to go from being angry to actually crying at the meeting because they were so emotionally moved that they saw the growth in their child. I was telling Tamara a story that's not in the book that I'd love to share. I personally was at a meeting where the parents were not very open. They did not think that the school was moving their child along, and they came in with a bit of an attitude, and the teacher wasn't even aware. The teacher just was prepared for the meeting, and as soon as the parents said, well, my child isn't learning and isn't reading or writing the way she should, the teacher said, well, let me just share something. And the teacher very calmly took out the child's journal and showed writing samples from September and October, November, when the meeting was, and looked at these samples. And the parents said, oh, of course she is learning. And then what it did was it drove a conversation, and now the teacher was helping the parents understand how to help the child be more successful writing when she was writing at home. The teacher didn't realize the parents didn't know, and the parents didn't have any strategies that they knew how to use to help the child write. So data in every, whether it's parents or teachers, can be simple, but it can be powerful.
This notion of kind of the teachers and the parents and the administrators coming together, you guys talk about it in terms of teaming, and you talk about it in terms of partnership. Can you give us a little bit more about what those words mean in this context?
Sure. So partnering, just to keep it in your mind what we mean when we refer to the partnership, we are referring to the families and the school district. So very clearly, we believe that there has to be a forged partnership between family engagement, and the schools. Now, many universities are now implementing family engagement courses, and that's great. We're so happy to see that. That was not something that 10 years ago was a required course in most schools for undergraduate students. But this idea that partnering is at the heart of conversations, that you need two partners, two individual groups to partner, is at the heart of our book. So once you have these partnerships, they form teams. So everybody is a member of the IEP team, okay, by law. And as Peggy said, this is now over 50 years that we've now been partnering. We're not saying that it always goes well. Sometimes it actually does. But what we are saying is that the partnerships is the beginning, that partnering between families and the school districts and hearing one another, having empathy for one another, presenting material to one another, having a pre-meeting with one another. This is a little bit foreign, and what we would like to see is that partnership grow immensely, not a little, but in a large, significant way. And that is one of the reasons that we wrote our book. And so it's a great question, thank you.
And I'd like to define the difference, because I think that's where a lot of people get confused. When we think about team and partnership, I would imagine that all of you have been on a team, whether it's a team at work, a team on a committee in an organization, or an IEP team. And you know what happens in a team. Everybody doesn't have a voice, and every team has a team leader. And a team leader is the one that facilitates the conversation and in many ways drives the way the team is going to move, because it has the organization, or in the IEP case, the school district's agenda that they are responsible for. We say, again, it's about what the child needs. So it can't be what the school district has to offer. And so we say be a partner, and we don't have a team leader. Maybe there will be an administrator, the law says.
And by law, there must be a case manager and or an administrator.
So that person's there, but that person isn't the leader of the team. That person is one of the partners. And so everybody through those conversations is going to come together. And that's the difference between, yes, it's an IEP team because the law calls it a team. And we like to say, let's turn that team into a partnership where everybody has an equal voice, and that the leader doesn't drive that, or the school district doesn't drive the conversation, but that the conversation drives the conversation, and the needs of the child is what is front and foremost in the conversation.
And just to piggyback on that, one of the things that we like to say is that we're doing it right now. We have a moderator who's doing an amazing job, and we're equal. We all have different experiences. We're all 100% equal, and I know that Peggy and I feel equal to everybody here attending this evening. We've all had our own experiences, and everybody here has some personal story with education. We've all been educated. We're either parents or administrators or teachers or teacher aides. It doesn't matter. And one of the things is parents will often say, this sounds like Shangri-La. But if you really think about it, every time there has been a shift, a paradigm shift in the way that we look at anything new, everybody will say, oh, that's not gonna happen, or, you know, we just can't do that. How do we make that work? You know, I only have this much time. And we do try and lay out in our book how it can be done. It is a roadmap, and it does have very specific pieces of important information. So we are asking, as we go around on our book tour, for a paradigm shift in looking at partnerships. That's really what we're looking to do.
In that partnerships, the parents obviously play an important role, and parents often want to be really engaged in the process, but they don't always know how, right? Like, parents make mistakes and they do things wrong, which messes up the partnership. Can you give us some tips and some pointers and some examples of how the parents can come in and be the best partner in that?
Sure. I'll start with when Tamara was talking about the pre-meeting, and we think that that's a unique idea, so that the very first time a child is identified in need of special education, the way things are usually done from our experiences, that a meeting is set up and the parents receive a formal invitation. All of this is outlined in the law. And along with that invitation is something called their procedural safeguards, and it tells them what's going to happen and what their legal rights are, which is overwhelming. I'm going to talk about my child and helping my child learn, and you're telling me about my legal rights?
Or please read this 35-page manual.
And so it's very uncomfortable. So if a teacher, whether a teacher or the school administrator, takes 20 minutes, a half an hour to meet with a parent and to go through the process. Now, the process is also outlined in our book. Process that can be found online, but really explains that process so that they feel that they understand what's going to happen. That's one thing. Another thing, that when parents come to a meeting, and we outline that in the book too, that the meeting there's an agenda, that parents are told what's going to happen step by step so they don't feel overwhelmed. If they went to that pre-meeting, they're going to walk into that meeting with a friend, with somebody who they feel they've now have some simpatico with.
Broke bread with.
And they're going to really feel, wow, this is good. This person understands and cares about my child. And it's already going to set that stage, and that will start to reduce the tension. And then if they use our model and start to talk and have conversations and really are open to understanding that they have to be an active listener and that they have to build on what each other says, then the stresses are going to be reduced. They're not going to be gone. It's your child they're talking about. They're not going to be gone, but it's going to be reduced, and they're going to feel that they have a partner in this, and that's what it is. If I have a problem, if you have a problem, and you have a partner to help you with that problem, it's much easier to get through it than if you feel that you're all alone.
So 2 more things to piggyback on what Peggy said. Number 1, when you come to a meeting as a parent, it is very important that you know you can bring somebody with you. A lot of parents don't know that, but by law, you could ask your neighbor. They don't even have to know about anything. If it makes you feel better, it could be the pizza delivery guy, but anybody is allowed to attend with you and to come if it's gonna make you feel empowered. And I truly recommend that. You know what I'm talking about, you've been there. So sometimes you make those calls, hey, I have that meeting coming up, please come with me. I'm shaking in my boots. Sure, I'll come with you, no problem. So that's the first thing. Please know that anybody can come in assistance. And number two, we talk about active listening. And this is just another kind of tidbit for parents, but you know, the parents can avoid certain things like, I don't like that, or I don't want that. Or we like to say that words have a lot of power, and this is a section in our book. And we really want parents to be aware of trying to engage in open-ended questions. So if the IEP team is asking a question and the parent has a question back, think about presenting it in an open-ended manner that gets the team to talk and keep talking. We really, really feel strongly that you don't say words like no, shouldn't, can't, won't. In fact, when we go in front of students who are going to be teachers, we have them try and say that. Try and say won't nicely. I won't. No, you know, we have them say, I won't. Well, if the parents are being told I won't, that's shutting down the conversation right away. So Peggy and I have created this model and belief that open-ended questions are really the way to go. And that goes for parents as well as educators. So just another thing that's in our book that we like to talk about, if that helps.
We had a question from the audience that kind of flips that to the other side, and they want to know, how do they go to a child care center that lacks training and education so that they can help a child with an IEP? How do you talk to that education facility in a way that they understand the needs of your child if you are the parent coming with all the information and that place may not have any?
So that would be, if you're talking about childcare, it would probably be a child from like the birth to 3 or early childhood
Probably
situation.
preschool based on the
Yes, it
discussion,
wouldn't
yeah.
be. So depending on where they were, I mean, it's your responsibility to be able to help the facility understand your child. You can share the IEP with them. You could give them something to read. My first advice would be make sure that when you choose a place, a child care center for your child, that these people are qualified. Because if you put your child in a program and the people in the program do not understand your child's anything about special education or differentiation of instruction or how to address different types of children's learning needs, then your child is going to be at a disadvantage. And you could tell the school 100 things and they're not going to understand. So as a parent, you have a responsibility to pick the most appropriate program for your child and one that is going to eventually work to help to transition your child into the public schools.
Now, I do want to add that sometimes the preschool is where you live and you don't have that luxury to, you know, specify the preschool program that the child is going to. I would just add to what Peggy said, that if you feel that the educators involved do not have a handle on your child's diagnosis or your child's specific learning needs, that is when you ask for meetings and start those conversations. Again, families can ask for meetings all the way through. There's no limit on how much talking can be done. Okay, so I would begin that process sooner rather than later. Try and do, unfortunately, some of your own due diligence. Bring our book, and then basically, you know, ask to have as many meetings as possible where those conversations get started.
So you guys have given us a lot of great nuggets of information. And when I read this book, I was floored because I couldn't believe I hadn't had this book before my first meeting, and I wish I had had it. But can you share some other of your favorite tips that come from this book?
Sure. One of the things that we do, because going back, just to piggyback on your last question, parents don't know what to say at a meeting. And so one of the things we have is we have something we call conversation starters. We recommend that if the parents are involved in an IEP process, that a teacher gives the parent the conversation starters. But parents can read this book. Those conversation starters offer ideas of what parents can think about. What is my child's strength? What are some things my child does successfully at home? What are my concerns? What am I doing so that my child is making progress? Or what have I tried and just isn't working? And you have to be talking about that. So all of those things and those kinds of questions are in the book, and I think that is great, along with how to participate in an IEP meeting is in the book, and it gives you the strategies of what to do, how to prepare, what to expect, and again, those are two of my favorite tips. What are yours?
I love that in our book, we have examples of writing samples. So, for example, I'm an educational consultant, and I get questions from educators that I work with when I go into school districts, and the teachers are like, what is acceptable to write to parents now in terms of an email? And we've put some of that language in the book. And then on the flip side, we get questions from families. What would be an appropriate letter, and who am I writing to, or who am I meeting with first? And we actually break down the segment of, you first go to your classroom teacher, then you want to see if that works. So we break down the levels in terms of, don't just run to the superintendent. There's a lot that goes on between you and the superintendent, and there's a lot of good, positive things. The second part of our title is the power of positive partnerships, right? So we really believe strongly in being positive as much as you can, and I love that we have exemplars in the book, because that is something that makes our book more of a trade book than a textbook, but we did it in a way that was very thought-provoking and step-by-step. So I really enjoy that about our book.
Right, and I would say one last thing. The fact that our book has 20 case studies, I think is wonderful. It's different than a lot of books, but in addition to that, I have had so many people who've read the book and parents say to me, oh, I went through that exact same thing. So when parents read stories that they can relate to, or read stories that might not be their problem, but can see some ways that their problem would mesh with this, and how through improving conversation, how building a partnership and a relationship, their child started to get what they needed to be successful. I think those case studies are really, and every one of them,
They're real.
They all happen. If you read them and say, oh, that's not possible, yes, it is. We only changed the names of the people in the story and maybe the gender or the age of the child a little bit, just to protect the innocent. But those are our stories. What was your favorite when you read me?
You stole it from me. It was the case studies, because I felt like, this is going to sound horrible, but I'm like, okay, my PPT meeting isn't so bad now. I'm not screwing up as much as I could be, but it really provides a level of understanding and empathy for both sides, right? Because they weren't just case studies about how parents did something wrong or how the educators did something wrong. It was really kind of highlighting all of the different pieces of both sides and constantly reminding you that the child needs to be the focus, right? And how often that gets forgotten. So before we wrap up, I just want to give you guys one more question, which is, what haven't I asked you? What other things do you want to make sure that our audience knows before they run out and buy this book?
I think I just want to, first I want to thank you all for coming. I think it's a wonderful turnout, and little by little we are trying to impact the educational landscape of practice, and we are trying to incorporate all of the community of practice and make an effective change. I guess I would leave everybody with this. Nothing is insurmountable. Never feel defeated. If you're positive and you're willing to converse, it can have a much greater impact than you think. And if at first you don't succeed, try again. And so that's a little bit of my wisdom for the evening.
Thank you, Tamara. First, thank all of you for coming. Jennifer, thank you for
Yes, thank you,
hosting this
Jennifer.
at the Westport Library. This was an honor and a privilege for us. And Sivan, you've been amazing, and thank you. Thank you for all the kind words you said about our book. I'm glad that it touched you, and I hope that it touches lots of people. I'm going to share something I got today, an email from somebody who said that they were not going to be able to attend tonight, but that they had the book and that they were also going to be sharing the book, the link to the book, with their child's teachers. And I think that's what it's all about. We've got to get this word out because we do have to have a paradigm shift. We have to start not having a communication barrier when it comes to educating our children, whether they're children with special needs or whether they're neurotypical. We have to be bringing information to that. If you watch my TED Talk, you'll see how it happened to me, and it wasn't because of a problem that was a special education problem. Communication breakdowns happen all the time, and if we want our child to be the winner and to get the best education they can and to be as successful as they can be, we have to improve communication and understand the power of a positive parent-educator partnership. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And to our sound and video, thank you also.
Thank you. We've recorded this event, and it will be available so you can share with other friends or colleagues of yours that couldn't make it here today. So look for that on the website. And we have copies of the book here for anybody who would like to purchase one tonight.